it seems impossible until it's done. And I think sometimes in developmental services or related human services fields, we think that the challenges of change are really overwhelming and difficult. But then we think of some of the things that have gone on in the world, and really, if they could negotiate an end to apartheid, probably we can help someone move out of a day program and have a different quality of life. So I like to keep those kind of things in mind. I think a lot of what I'm talking about, it is realistic and attainable, even if it's difficult. This concept of neurodiversity is something I came across through participation in the YAI conference. It's the biggest conference on intellectual and developmental disabilities every year in New York City. And last year's conference was based around neurodiversity, which they described as the acceptance and embrace of people with cognitive differences. And you can see the rest of the description there. And really the theme that came out, particularly with their keynote and plenary speakers, is thinking about the work that we do a bit differently. So from our historical past, where we focused on what they call remediation, so looking at the person with a disability, looking at their deficits, and how could we more or less cure them or reduce the impact of their deficits. And then, another step along that path was more about accommodating. So a little more of an acceptance of disability as being a part of humanity, and then how could we accommodate those individuals to be a part of our community, recognizing there are some barriers. And then perhaps the ultimate step, and what we're struggling to get to today, is valuing, actually appreciating what people with intellectual disabilities offer to their communities and valuing them. Just a little fun. I did mention these two resources, and they're definitely worth a look if you're interested in these two concepts. So for person-centered practices, there is a Canadian learning community for person-centered practices. It was actually part of a international movement. And you can get some excellent person-centered practice resources there. They're free, downloadable, various templates that you can use. And if you're interested in learning more about social capital, you can go to the Interdependent Network, where they actually have recently posted a summary of the symposium that I was talking about. And one of the fun things there is Professor Condalucci, who's become one of the better-known champions of social capital, he was wearing this diagram on his shirt during the symposium, and it's the friendship algorithm, which you can find also the clip on YouTube. It's for those Big Bang Theory fans. Yeah. This was Dr. Sheldon Cooper's method. He realized he needed some help with friendships, so he got a wonderful book called, what is his name now? The Cockatoo That's New at the Zoo. He analyzed this children's book, and he designed this algorithm that basically explains how you get friends. It's worth a look. It's quite amusing, but it's actually quite realistic. And we often we identify that people with intellectual disabilities don't have a lot of social capital, which basically boils down to they don't have a lot of friends or networks. But we don't actually look at how friends and networks are created. We just analyze that there is a problem, and sometimes we try to solve it in unusual ways. And in human services, the way we often try to solve the problem is by clustering people with the same type of disability and assuming that this more or less solves the problem, which doesn't. It's a systems destination. We should never really think of that as a final destination. It can be a need that people have, but if we can just keep in mind what are ways that a person could move in a more community-based direction, and how could we do that? And then, of course, relationships, that's a big one. It's all about relationships. So, of course, family, but friends, neighbors, and unpaid supports as part of the mix that includes paid support. So that's really, I think, fundamental to our perspective at LiveWorkPlay. It's particularly on that last piece, because as people grow those networks, a lot of other things tend to work themselves out. Person-centered planning. So we were having some discussions following the person-centered planning gathering in Thorold, and some of us had identified that there was a number of different constituents in that conference. There were some that were just new to the whole idea of person-centered planning and were just getting information. There were some people that could talk about it and obviously read all kinds of books. but then when you had a conversation, they weren't actually doing anything person-centered in their agency. And then there were people that they could talk the talk, and they were walking the walk a little bit. And then there was a fourth group that whether they knew how to talk about it or not, they were living it. So their approach was really about listening to people and trying to carry out their wishes. So I have been around the table for so-called person-centered planning sessions, and more or less the professional that was leading the exercise has announced to the individual and the family, welcome to our person-centered planning session, here are your choices. That is not person-centered thinking, and certainly not person-centered planning. That is taking your existing practices and applying a new language to it and not really changing anything. So that is kind of the danger at this time. If you try to legislate things like person-centered thinking, you just end up having language imposed on existing practices in a lot of cases. So really, what it means is you're looking for more of the green things and less of the red things. So again, more family, friends, colleagues, coworkers, classmates, neighbors, perhaps a spouse, only as needed, workers, staff, doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker. So if this all can sound very complicated, I think it's actually not that hard to measure, to sit down with a person and find out how many of the green things do they have and how many of the red things do they have. And let's see if what we're doing is actually leading to more of the green and less of the red. And that's how you could start a basic measurement of social capital in a person's life.